This is the Nova 11 Pro, Huawei's new selfie-centric mid-ranger. Besides the two front-facing cameras, what else can you expect here? And is it a worthwhile upgrade over the previous model? I'm Will for GSM Arena, and let's find out in our Huawei Nova 11 Pro review. With a focus on flashy looks and front cameras, Huawei's Nova Pro mid-rangers are targeted at the younger audience. This is the new installment, and you might expect some upgrades, like maybe a new chipset or cameras, or some tweaks with the display. Well, the Huawei Nova 11 Pro doesn't appear to bring any of those, so how does it upgrade on the Nova 10 Pro? The most obvious thing is the new design. You also get laser autofocus on the rear cameras, and higher base storage. More like a facelift than a brand new model. But let's get started with the design changes. Unlike the previous model, our Nova 11 Pro has a back panel made from faux or vegan leather. The leather itself has a pattern of debossed Nova logos, lending it a unique look. Then there's the king of the Nova logos towards the bottom, in gold. The other design change is the camera bump. Rather than a gold ring around the whole thing, it only goes around the main cam, and it's engraved with fine text. The frame of the phone is plastic and quite thin. Both the front and the back curve into it. Between this and the leather, the phone is overall quite grippy. There are other colorways with glass backs instead of leather, but those are exclusive to the Chinese market. The Nova 11 Pro features a curved 6.78-inch OLED display with Kunlun glass protection and a 120Hz refresh rate. It appears to be the same display as the previous model, including the pill-shaped cutout for the dual selfie camera, and the resolution that's a bit higher than your standard 1080p. The color accuracy is good here, and there's support for 10-bit color and HDR10+ video. The brightness is decent, but far from the best in class. We measured a maximum of over 500 nits with the manual slider, and this can boost to 700 nits with the auto brightness enabled. And for the refresh rate, you get the choice of standard, high, and dynamic. The dynamic mode will dial from 120 FPS down to 60 when the screen is idling, to save power. The Nova 11 Pro has stereo speakers. One sits at the bottom and the other is at the top, with openings in the frame as well as on the front for the earpiece. The speakers aren't too loud, earning just an average mark in our testing, but the sound is well balanced. You can listen and compare to other phones with the provided link. You can wake up and unlock the phone with an optical under-display fingerprint reader. It's quite responsive, but we wish it was placed a little higher. And you can get the Nova 11 Pro with 256 or 512 gigs of storage on board, and that's not expandable to microSD. And now we get to the software side of things. As usual, things are different from what you'd get on a typical Android phone. The Nova 11 Pro runs on EMUI 13, and you don't have Google services or apps here. Instead, you get Huawei's replacements and alternatives. You can get new apps through Huawei's proprietary app gallery. The app selection and app gallery is growing, but there are still some notable omissions compared to Google Play. Still, through the integrated pedal search, you can find apps you're looking for outside the gallery, like developers' websites and other app repositories, and install them from there. And now there are options like Gbox, a virtual machine which lets you install and run Google Apps. In our testing, they all run pretty well too. The apps you install through it can sit on the home screen along with the rest. No need to go through Gbox every time you need one. Besides that, EMUI's features are familiar. You get a separate notification center and control center, similar to what you get from Apple or Xiaomi. Swiping down anywhere on the home screen opens the system-wide search. EMUI 13 supports large folders, which organize apps into a more compact space, but the apps remain accessible with a single touch. And you also get stackable widgets now. Time to get into the chipset. It's the same as on last year's model, a Snapdragon 778. This chip has been popular for a while now, though here is a version tailor-made for Huawei, without support for 5G connectivity. We didn't run into any surprises, either when running benchmarks or using the phone. The performance of the Nova 11 Pro is predictably solid, though at this point there are popular competitors with newer silicon which are even more powerful. And when it comes to thermal management, we did notice significant throttling in our CPU stress test, with sudden dips and spikes which could cause stutter in games. The Nova 11 Pro also has the same battery capacity as the previous model, 4,500 mAh. As expected, the battery life is the same here, with an overall endurance rating of 89 hours, a bit below average for the class. To make up for that though, you get impressive charging speed. Despite having the same power rating as last year's model, the Nova 11 Pro is actually a little faster to recharge. We were able to go from 0 to 73% in 15 minutes, and a full charge took just 23 minutes. Now let's talk about the cameras. You get the same 50 megapixel main cam and 8 megapixel ultra-wide cam as on the Nova 10 Pro. This time around there's no depth sensor, but you do get new laser autofocus. During the day, 12.5 megapixel photos from the main camera come out nice. Detail is excellent, with a natural look to fine detail and textures. The dynamic range is great, and colors have the right amount of pop. There is a 2x zoom toggle using the main cam, and the results aren't half bad, with enough detail. The white balance is a bit off here though, leaning toward greenish. Portraits can also be taken at either 1x, 2x, or even 3x zoom. In the native 1x the quality is nice, with good subject detection, but perhaps the blur level is a bit excessive. As expected, with higher magnifications, you get less detail as digital zoom takes its toll. In low light, photos from the main cam are very good. There's some behind the scenes night processing going on, and the resulting shots are well exposed, with good development of shadows and retained highlights. Colors are vivid, detail is good overall, and there's no noise. Enabling the dedicated night mode doesn't make a huge difference. There is some better shadow development though, and extra sharpness in some scenes. The Nova 11 Pro records video in up to 4K resolution at 30 FPS with all of its cameras. The 4K footage from the main camera is surprisingly soft though. The contrast is high, at least a narrow dynamic range. At least the color rendition is good. Stabilization is always enabled. It will do a good job when you're pointing the phone in one direction, and it will pan smoothly, but it fails to eliminate shakiness when walking. In low light, 4K video from the main cam isn't the sharpest around, and the dynamic range is average, but it's still decent for the class. Now onto the ultra-wide cam. Its 8 megapixel photos have a noticeably different color rendition than the main cams, especially in the skies. There is a good amount of detail considering the resolution, and respectable dynamic range. Since the ultra-wide has autofocus, you can use it to take macro close-up shots, and they come out nice. In low light conditions, the ultra-wide camera relies on some built-in processing, but there's no dedicated night mode available. Still, the dynamic range is adequate, and better lit scenes have a decent amount of detail. 4K video from the ultra-wide isn't great. It's even softer than the main cams, with noticeable noise and narrow dynamic range. Finally, we have the Nova 11 Pro's dual selfie cams, a 60 megapixel primary camera, and an 8 megapixel portrait telephoto. The main camera actually saves 13 megapixels instead of 15 after binning, as it doesn't use the entire sensor. Photos from the main selfie cam are excellent. The detail is great, the colors are pleasant, and the dynamic range is very good. And since this camera has autofocus, you can count on faces coming out sharp every time. The 2x portrait camera zooms just enough to fit your head when holding the phone at arm's length. It captures a nice amount of detail, and it manages to throw backgrounds out of focus for some natural bokeh. So that's the Huawei Nova 11 Pro. It does a lot of things right. You get a unique leather design, a nice curved display, super fast charging, and some good selfie cameras. However, besides the design, you don't really get enough improvement over the previous model. The lack of ingress protection, the unimpressive video recording, and the older chipset fall behind what some competitors can offer. And as a Huawei device, your average user would have to weigh the lack of Google services when considering this phone. So overall, getting the Nova 11 Pro only really makes sense if you're in love with the leather back. Thanks for watching, guys. Here are some alternatives to the Nova 11 Pro, starting with the Samsung Galaxy A54. Another option is the Moto Edge 40. Let us know what you think, and I'll see you on the next one.